Hi there, I'm Jonny Old. I fish around the southern region of Dorset and Hampshire area. I guess I first started fishing when I was probably around 6 years old, and probably like a lot of people, I've seen things on YouTube, things on TV, and fancied giving it a go. It all started probably with me having to go down a local park lake. They had an open day there, and if I remember rightly, I caught a little roach, very small. I think it was probably a minnow-sized roach, and I really loved it. And from then, my mum and dad kindly bought me a small, I think it was osprey fishing setup. You get your hooks and your split shot and a couple of floats. And we went down the free stretch of Dorset, the Dorset Stour, and I remember catching a lot of minnows, some dace and some gudgeon, nothing big in particular. And a lovely old guy down there used to help me out untangle knots and things, and in the end show me how to trot properly down the river and bait up with maggots. And from then, a couple of friends at school, we used to go out together and we used to get dropped off at some lakes and catch roach and all the small stuff, until one day, I believe it was a bank holiday, and my mum and dad were taking me down to Hordle Lakes, I think in Hampshire, and the tackle shop was shut. And for me, maggots was the only bait I could catch fish on. I hadn't really caught fish on anything else. And all we had was a tin of sweet corn. It was pretty devastating, really. We had this lovely day and I was not happy because we didn't have any maggots. But a kind bailiff down there went and had a rummage around in one of the fishery bins and brought back half a tin of spam. From then, we chopped up in little chunks and we fished next to what, looking back, was probably the only spot I think you thought I could probably catch carp from, was a little monk at the end, the corner of the lake, and chucked in some bits of spam, and my float went under and I hooked into the biggest thing I've ever seen at that age, and it was a 6-pound mirror carp, and I was absolutely ecstatic with that. And that day I also caught, I believe, a 7-pound common. From that point, it was pretty much all about trying to catch carp now, going to several other little day ticket lakes around the area and using spam, then started using sweet corn and some pellets, soft hookable pellets, and carried on from there. It wasn't probably until maybe a year or so later when I saw boilies in a tackle shop and thought, oh, I need to give these a go. Went on YouTube, looked up a few YouTube videos and learned about the hair rig, and went to Ring with Tackle, bought some ready-tied hair rigs and went down to a local lake, Sumley Lakes, and fished against this roped off area. Apparently it was the good swim, and we walked all the way up there, got there, set the rods up. I had one float rod and then my carp rod, which was a mix and match rod, which was found in the dump. Fished along this little roped off area. I think I catapulted some boilies out, and not long after, my rod was away and it was set up on probably a sea fishing type bank stick, just with the standard sort of V head. And the rod actually went over the bank stick, went straight in the lake, and I ran in, grabbed the rod, brought it back, and it was a 10-pound common. And from that point, that was probably the biggest point in my angling, catching this 10-pound common. Using some, I think it was, yeah, some 2-3 hook baits or something like that. And I was hooked. I caught another one that evening as well. I think I caught an 8-pound common, and the same thing happened. The rod got pulled in, so I didn't know how to set the bait runner correctly. And from then, yeah, sort of progressed with my carp fishing, and sort of that through probably the next 3 years, I got really keen into it, and never did nights, wasn't allowed to, unfortunately. But it was all about going and using boilies and pellets and getting, in the end, saved up and got 2 matching rods and then 2 bite alarms, and went on from there. And sort of the passion and the obsession went on to thinking about maybe even getting a career in angling. And I went to Sparsholt College and did fishery management there for 3 years. And during that time, it was pretty much just completely obsessed about carp fishing. You were the whole bunch of other lads who all just taught carp fishing all day, and every moment on my free time was going down to the lakes, being dropped off, and doing nights over the weekend and stuff like that. So from that, I was very lucky to get a job in the industry and become a river keeper up in Winchester. And whilst I was working there and sort of being more in the industry, my whole mindset changed with angling, and I started fishing some harder sort of venues, some bigger venues. Times before it was all sort of small, sort of 3-4 acre lakes, and then you stepping onto like somewhere like Hightown or Longham lakes, and they're all sort of 20 odd acres, and all your angling sort of changes then. And I started fishing weedy venues, which is a massive change in anyone who's angling, and understanding what you need to do to present. And at first probably I wasn't fishing them correctly, and through meeting other people, watching videos, I learned how to fish these venues and trial and error. So I started using like naked trolleys in the weed, and you started catching, took that to other places and lakes which didn't have a lot of weed, something like Norfield lakes. Fish used to congregate in the areas where there was weed, so being able to fish in these areas was crucial. Things like using zigs, that had never really even crossed my mind, that carp spend most of their time up in the water layer, and you're able to catch them in that state of trance right through the middle of the water. And like places where I've been down to Longham Reservoir, at the time you're allowed to use zigs, and simple things like using 3-4 foot red zigs was a deadly tactic, and sometimes bait wouldn't be the way to go there. Also just sort of trying to understand that pressure could really affect angling, your catch rate, and sometimes on busy lakes, fishing one rod when everyone else is using 3, all the fish end up in your swim because there's less pressure in it. And that was a deadly tactic on several places I went to. Fishing day swims, I can remember a time when I was fishing like in Ringwood Northfield, and there was a day only swim, very little pressure. You'd get the odd day angler in there, and I baited it for a couple of days, went back and fished it, and no one even paid any attention to it. And I think I had 6 fish in a day, which was pretty unheard of at the time, just through fishing one rod to a snag in a day swim where no one really fished. But it was all through fishing these local venues and watching other people, watching very good anglers fish as well, where your whole mindset changes. Instead of going to different lakes on the weekend and just going fishing and loving it, my mindset changed to try and target individual fish and target venues and sort of fish venues hard. But I guess what had the biggest impact on me in that period of time was a couple of significant catches. One was small buoys out of a lake called Northfield in Ringwood, which was braced with a 36-pound common at the time, which they were both my PBs during that time. I can remember that day like the back of my hand. It was probably the biggest buzz in my angling I've ever had, because I wanted to catch that carp so bad. It blew my mind. But I remember the day like it was yesterday. I booked a couple of days off work during a period of time which I thought it could come out. It was going to come out along this section of roped off area on the lake, a sanctuary, where I thought it could have its sort of spring feed up, as it were. It had done a bite there the year before during that week along that roped off area, and I thought, got to get in there, take a few days holiday off work, get down to the lake. And I got down there. It was fairly busy, but I got in a swim where I thought it could have come out from. I baited fairly heavily at the time. I used a lot of salt. It was just sort of mid-spring. Used a lot of salt, a lot of bright sweet corn, maize, and put quite a big amount out, probably 10 litres. And again, put 3 rods on it. I was using braid at the time, which was a new thing in my angling. trying to fish really tight and accurate. And the night went in, it was quite a hectic night. I got wiped out by a catfish trailing line, wiped out all 3 rods, had to re-spool on a rod, and learning simple things like not having your head torch on your head when you're casting at night because the rod blinds you, and having it on the floor, simple things like that. I managed to get 3 rods back out on the spot, and throughout the night I had a take, and it was this lovely big common, real rare one, and I was over the moon with that PB common. My mate was down with me, we were both celebrating, and I think I had a small mirror through the early hours of the morning. I wiped out all 3 rods, got them back out on the spot, put a couple more spoms out, and sat back. It must have probably been 3:30, 4 in the morning, just getting light, and the fish started showing back on the spot, and it looked good for another bite. And with that, right hand rod was away, played it in, good dogged fight, and me and my mate both saw this fish roll. It was probably 30 yards out or so, and we both looked at each other and thought, this could be the one. And as it got in the net, it sort of went on its side and slid over, and we both saw, and I gave it the big cheer. And that was, yeah, probably the most memorable capture to date, really. It was the biggest achievement I've ever had in my angling on that particular fish. It was 41.6, I think, at the time, and both, yeah, a common PB and a mirror PB in the morning was amazing. Through all of that and progression, I caught those fish and went back to the lake a couple more times, had a couple of other ones, and then I was very fortunate enough to be offered a ticket on the syndicate. I'm here today, this being lovely Milton Abbas. So, Milton Abbas, it is an absolutely stunning venue. It's probably around 9 acres in size. It's spring fed and fed by a stream coming in through the top. It's quite a shallow venue. It's very weedy, very silty, a lot of pads. However, being spring fed, it's quite warm, the water. It fishes exceptionally well in the winter, throughout the spring pretty much, and holds lots and lots of beautiful carp. There's probably around 300 in here. It's got a good stock of fish, a lot of 30-pounders and a fair number of 40s. The fishing can be quite challenging, being such a weedy venue. There's a lot of things which sort of stop you from fishing, a lot of floating weed beds. At the moment here, we've got the bottom where it's sunny is sort of popping up, lifting your lines up, making presentation quite tricky. So it's a lot of things which can sort of stop you from fishing accurately and effectively. In this lake, there's more than big carp. There's big roach, massive tench, massive bream, massive pike, some really, really big crucians, and in general is a stunning mouth-watering venue, which I'm very lucky to be fishing at the moment. I started fishing down here at Milton Abbas around 3 seasons ago, and my angling changed entirely. It was no longer doing big casts or anything like that. It's quite small, intimate, and it turned into just being a boilie only pretty much approach whilst fishing here. My first season went pretty well. I had quite a lot of smaller fish throughout the summer, and and I was sort of struggling to get through to the 30 pounders which are in here. So sort of again my angling changed, started using real big sort of hook baits, 18, 20 millers, and just doing a boilie only approach. And that sort of picked up throughout the winter. As I said, it's a really good winter water, and my first season on here I was particularly keen. I had a fair bit of time on my hands and I caught quite a few fish that winter. Went on to catch a couple of upper 30s, and in the March, my first season, I had a fish I really wanted to catch called the two-tone linear, which was 39.15. One of sort of the lake's bigger fish, absolute stunner. Really extremely hard fighting fish, probably one of the hardest fighting fish I've ever hooked. Towed me out on a boat for a good 20 minutes, weeded me up, heavy boat battle, getting it back in, and yeah, that really topped off my first season on here. Sorry. Lockdown happened then, and then when we were allowed back out, things were fairly tricky down here. The lake was really weedy, and I sort of struggled a little bit, and it picked up again throughout the summer, and had a few real nice ones. But probably over the last season and a half, I've done fairly well. I've had a couple of the bigger fish. I've had several 40 pounders out of here, and the target fish that I really wanted, one being No Name, Stew Pot, the Kidney, all being real nice 40 pounders, which were the ones which I really dearly wanted to catch when joining. But like with the angling on here, comparing it to other places, I hadn't really experienced extreme weed, pads, so it's a relatively challenging lake, but if you get things right, the rewards are definitely there. Tactics wise, there's been two main elements to my approach. Firstly being the presentation and line lay. Like I said, this lake is really weedy, really silty, and being presented is key. I use a really heavy fluorocarbon mainline to tackle this. Keeps everything pinned down over the low-lying weed beds, sort of beds itself into the silt. This goes on to a naked heli-safe system, so I can present nicely if it goes in the weed, into the deep silt. I can set my top bead further up the line depending on where I'm fishing. The rig wise, I've been doing a lot of pop-up fishing on here, real sort of low line pop-ups on the Ronnie rig with long boom sections, so these can just kick out and just flutter down onto any sort of debris which is on the bottom. This ensures I'm well presented and gives me the best chance of getting a bite. Secondly, bait, more specifically boilies. The fish in here, they love boilies, and it's a really boilie orientated water. There's a lot of good bait which goes into this lake, but for me in my angling, I found that sail as being the best. I think this is probably because it's a really good food bait. It's very digestible, and on here, there's a lot of really good winter fishing, and having a real good digestible attractive bait is key. They're at their sort of slowest, they got the slow metabolism at that time of year, and having a bait which I know they'll happily readily eat and pass through, I think has been key for me this winter. I can give an example. I was fishing really high pressure, really cold, it must have been -5, -6, my water butt froze, my milk froze, and through that 2 nights, I think I must have had, I think it was 4 or 5 fish. I had one of the ones I wanted, mid-30 mirror, called Bowler's Pet, and I just gave him the bait. I must have gone through probably 8, 9 kilo of boilie through those 2 nights, just topping up 1.5 kilo, 2 kilos after every fish, making sure that both my spots had a good helping of boilie over the top, and they just kept on eating it. It's a really good boilie as well to fish all year round, not just the winter. So this enables me to keep on using the same bait throughout the year. I'm maintaining my confidence in all my fishing, and if I want to put less bait in, I can use all the different smart liquids and just keep on putting that food source going in. Like I said earlier, I've been using the Ronnie rig consistently down Milton over the last few months. It has a load of benefits, one main benefit being that it's really simple to tie. When tying this rig, I start off with a curved shank pattern hook in size 4. It's perfect for this presentation, and I simply thread on a few little components onto the hook section of this rig to get it started. I trim a small section of probably around 1 centimetre long piece of green shrink tubing. This is threaded onto the eye section of the hook. I then get a spinner swivel and I push that through the eye of the hook and slide the shrink tubing over, given probably a very small, maybe a mil gap, just so there's plenty of movement with the hook rotating with the swivel. I then grab a lighter and gently have the lighter probably a couple mil away from the shrink tubing and just melt it down and make sure that all the components are all tight up against the hook. I follow this by then threading a small hook bead on the point of the hook, following it round, just probably in line with the end point of the hook on the shank. I then follow this with a micro rig ring swivel and then put another hook bead on top, giving a couple mil gap in between so there's still plenty of movement, but making sure that the top hook bead is opposite the barb. This is your hook section of the spinner rig complete. I then follow up tying up the boom section. To do this, I grab probably around 15 inches of the 20 pound or the 25 pound IQ2 boom section, and I form a loop facing away from you, and I pinch this in my finger and thumb. I get the spinner hook section which we just made, and I thread that on to the tag end of the IQ2, which I form the loop in my fingers. I then grab the tag end, making sure I don't pull down too tight on the loop, and I thread it over my finger. I then pull it back through and pinch down. So I've got 2 loops made, one going over my thumb, and then I have the tag end going through my finger. On my thumb section, you'll see that hopefully you've got your end spinner section is just on that, and I pull that through the other loop. I then gently moisten, pull down the knot, and you should have your spinner hook section inside a loop created with the boom section. I then add a small piece of putty. At the other end of the boom section, I thread on a green anti-tangle sleeve. I then create another loop knot just the same as before and thread the anti-tangle sleeve up to that loop knot. This is now ready to go to add on to your other end of your terminal tackle. There's a few reasons why I really like using this rig. Firstly, it gives me 2 hook bait options. I can happily use a wafter or pop-up in this rig depending on where I'm fishing and what I'm fishing over. If I need to fish on the deck, if it's very clear out there, I can happily put on a wafter, or if it's a bit weedy, bit silty, I can fish a pop-up. Secondly, it's really simple and easy to change your hook if you catch a fish. You can quickly nip off the shrink tube and put on a new fresh hook. And finally, I found that this rig spins and turns incredibly well, converting pickups into bites. It has really good hook holds, which ends up landing more fish. So it's a really effective rig, easy and simple to tie. If you haven't tried it yet, go give it a go. Fortunately, living where I do, there's a lot of really nice target waters I want to give a go this year. One being a real big 55-acre pit, and hopefully if I catch something out there, it could be my first UK 50-pounder. Other than that, I'd love to try and catch a 30-pounder out of the river where I work. I think it's doable. There's a couple knocking about that sort of size, and that's definitely on my mind this year. But for now, I'm going to focus on Milton Abbas. There's a couple more I'd really love to catch out of here, and it's a lovely place, a lot of really lovely people here. It's a great syndicate, and hopefully keep the catch reports coming in.